The faint scent of Greg's cologne lingered in the air as he whispered to Erin, "Don't let her speak. She'll make it about herself." Still, I didn't flinch, only adjusted my wine glass, the crystal cool against my fingers. As their laughter rippled around me, the sting of betrayal sharpened, mixing with the tension that had always defined my relationship with my daughter. While the conversation continued, I realized I'd been sidelined for too long. That's when I made the decision. I'd stop paying for their silence once and for all. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The candles flickered like small interrogations along the center of the table, their light catching the edge of Nora Whitfield's wine glass and the strained smiles surrounding it. Rowan Bistro was known for its hush, the kind of quiet that made people measure their laughter, but tonight even that calm felt borrowed. Erin had chosen the place, of course. "Something elegant but not fussy," she'd said in the group text. Nora had only replied with a heart emoji. At 71, she'd learned that minimal words kept peace better than any sermon. Now, sitting under the amber glow, she listened as her daughter stood to toast. "To Mom," Erin began, voice crisp with practiced affection. "The woman who taught me everything I know about patience and good posture." Laughter rippled. Small, polite, empty. Nora smiled, fingers grazing the stem of her glass. She could feel Greg's cologne before he leaned in, the woody arrogance of it. He raised his glass too, adding, "And to Mom, who still insists on paying the tip even when we say no." The table chuckled again. A performance. Nora's chest tightened, but she lifted her glass anyway. "Well," she began softly, "thank you, everyone. It means—" That's when she heard it. A whisper, so faint it could have been mistaken for the rustle of a napkin. But Nora's hearing was precise, sharpened by decades of being talked over. Greg, leaning toward Erin. "Don't let her speak. She'll make it about herself." Erin's reply was quiet but clear. "Just move on to dessert." Nora's hand froze mid-air, glass trembling slightly before she steadied it. Her face held the same smile she'd used at every holiday dinner since her husband's death. Gentle, composed, unreadable. She set her glass down. The silverware clinked, the sound oddly final. "Mom?" Erin's tone was breezy. "You were saying?" Nora shook her head once. "Nothing important." Greg grinned, satisfied as if a tiny victory had been secured. The waiter appeared with dessert menus, and the conversation spun back to college applications, gas prices, and Callie's latest track meet. Nora barely heard any of it. She studied the candlelight instead, how it reflected in the glassware like little rows of memory, birthdays, anniversaries, all the times she'd filled the silence with generosity. Her fork traced circles in the condensation of her water glass. The motion steadied her pulse. They'd done it so smoothly. Whisper, nod, dismissal. As if her words, her stories, had become inconvenient background noise. When the crème brûlée arrived, Erin snapped a quick photo for social media. "Smile, Mom." Nora did. The flash caught her mid-blink, her smile too polite, her eyes too sharp. "Beautiful," Erin said, checking the picture. "We'll caption it, 'Family nights are the best nights.'" Nora's throat tightened around the irony. She took one slow sip of water, then reached for her napkin. Folded it carefully, half, then quarter. The gesture gave her time to think. Her purse rested beside her chair, soft black leather, old but well kept. She opened it quietly, fingers brushing the edge of an envelope she'd tucked inside that morning, not for sentiment, for preparation. Across the table, Greg waved the waiter over, motioning for the check with his usual flourish. "Don't worry, Nora. We've got this." "Of course," Erin added quickly. "It's your birthday. You're not paying for anything." Nora smiled again, small, deliberate. I wouldn't dream of it. The waiter nodded and stepped away. The family resumed their chatter, none of them noticing that Nora's hand stayed on the purse's clasp, thumb resting against the cool brass. She wasn't angry? Not exactly. Anger burned fast and bright. This was something colder, quieter, a decision crystallizing. When the check returned, laid discreetly near Greg's elbow, Nora watched his expression change. The number made his jaw tighten. Before he could reach for his wallet, she drew her purse closer, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. The candlelight caught the silver edge of her card case as she opened it. Erin frowned. "Mom, what are you—" Nora didn't answer. Her smile never moved, but her eyes did. Clear, steady, unflinching. The kind of look that made even silence sound like a statement. And as the waiter approached again, pen in hand, Nora's napkin, neatly folded, remained on the empty plate. A pale square of surrender turned into something sharper. She reached into her purse. The waiter hesitated beside Greg, the folded leather bill tray balanced like an invitation and a warning. Greg barely glanced at him before sliding it closer, muttering, "800? For pasta and air conditioning?" His laugh was thin, meant to sound casual. Erin leaned in, her smile rehearsed for the server. "We'll split it, of course." Nora didn't speak. The hum of the restaurant felt muffled, as if the air itself was waiting. Her fingers moved with deliberate calm as she opened her purse fully this time, revealing her silver card holder. Greg noticed. "Mom, seriously, don't even think about it." But she already had. The card, a platinum shimmer, caught the candlelight. Nora held it between two fingers, then turned it face down on the table next to the bill. "Actually," she said softly, "you won't need to cover it." Erin blinked. "Mom, we said—" Nora's tone was polite, almost tender. "I already did." For a beat, no one understood. The waiter, sensing the static in the air, stepped back discreetly. Greg frowned. "You what?" Nora looked up at him, her expression as still as polished glass. "I paid. In full. 3 days ago." The room seemed to shrink. Somewhere near the bar, glassware clinked, and a woman laughed too loudly at something that suddenly felt far away. Greg barked a laugh. "You're kidding." Erin made the reservation— "No," Nora interrupted, gently but firmly. Erin thought she did. Erin's voice wavered. "What are you talking about?" Nora's smile didn't reach her eyes. "When I heard Rowan Bistro was booked for the weekend, I called ahead. Made sure there'd be a table big enough for all of you. I even arranged the pre-selected menu, so you wouldn't have to worry about cost or options." She folded her napkin again, slow and precise, setting it beside her plate like punctuation. "You simply confirmed it." Erin's face reddened. "You went behind me? To make me look—" Nora raised one hand lightly. "To make it easy," she said. "That's all I've ever done." Greg leaned back, smirking. "So you wanted the credit." "Got it." Something inside Nora went still. She reached for the receipt tray, opened it with steady fingers, and slid her signed copy toward him. The bold ink read, "Paid in full, N. Whitfield." "Apparently," she said quietly, "that's all I'm here for." Silence fell across the table like a curtain. Even Callie stopped scrolling her phone. Drew's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Erin's voice cracked through it, brittle. "Mom, that's not fair." Nora stood. "Neither is pretending gratitude when you've already rehearsed dismissal." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Nora reached into her purse again, this time drawing out a small envelope, the same one she'd touched earlier. She set it on the table beside Erin's dessert spoon. Erin's eyes darted to it. "What's that?" "Something you don't have to read tonight," Nora said, gathering her shawl. "But you probably should." Greg's laugh tried to fill the gap again, too loud, too forced. "You're being dramatic, Nora. It's dinner, not a will reading." Nora looked at him. "No, Greg. It's an audit." The words hung in the air, sharp and uninvited. The waiter appeared again, unsure whether to clear the plates. Nora smiled at him, soft and steady. "Everything's settled. Thank you for your kindness." He nodded quickly, relief flashing in his eyes, and vanished toward the register. Nora turned back to her family, their discomfort blooming across their faces like a slow bruise. Aaron's jaw clenched. Callie stared down at the table. Drew shifted his weight as though the chair had turned fragile. "Mom," Aaron said finally, voice shaking with a mix of pride and panic. "You didn't have to." "I know," Nora said. "That's what made it worth doing." She picked up her coat from the back of the chair, smoothing the sleeve as if brushing off dust. The faint murmur of other diners filled the room again, returning like a tide she no longer stood in. At the doorway she paused, turning just enough to see the table again, her family frozen between denial and embarrassment, the flicker of the candles bending toward the draft she left behind. The receipt lay between them, a thin white ledger of all the unspoken years. Nora adjusted her shawl. Outside, the night air was cool, steady, unjudging. As she stepped into it, she didn't look back. The glass door of Rowan Bistro sighed shut behind Nora, sealing in the murmurs she left behind. Outside, the cold hit her cheeks like truth. She walked slowly toward the parking lot, heels steady on the cobblestones, the night air tasting faintly of wood smoke and rain. Inside, she knew what was happening. Greg's half-joking scoff, Aaron's whispered damage control, Callie's silent texting under the table. A familiar cycle of dismissal replaying itself, now stripped of its warmth. She didn't need to hear it. She'd memorized that script years ago. Still, as she reached her car, the echo of Greg's voice caught up in her mind. "She just wants attention." The phrase landed like dust, soft, but settling everywhere. Nora started the engine, the headlights slicing through the dark like a verdict. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that made her pulse audible in her ears. She passed the same old storefronts, the florist closed early, the barber shop still lit but empty, and thought about how often she'd driven this same route, always returning to a house that never asked for explanations. When she turned into her driveway, a faint orange glow flickered from the front window. Vivian's car was there, her faithful old Buick, the one that sounded like gravel when it started. Of course, she'd waited up. The front door opened before Nora reached the porch. Vivian stood in her robe, one hand holding a coffee mug, the other braced against the frame like a gatekeeper of good sense. "Well?" Vivian asked, her voice low and alive. "Tell me you burned them quietly." Nora stepped inside, shutting out the chill. "No," she said, slipping off her shawl. "I let the receipt do the damage." Vivian's grin was quick, fierce. "Ah? Paper cuts to the ego, my favorite kind." Nora didn't smile back. Not quite. She set her purse down on the sideboard, the faintest tremor in her hands. It wasn't loud, but it landed. Vivian followed her into the kitchen. The air smelled of fresh coffee and lemon cleaner. Vivian's doing. "You always did have a gift for polite ruin," she said, handing Nora a mug. "What did they do this time?" "They told me not to speak." Vivian blinked. "To your face?" "Not quite," Nora said, staring into the dark liquid. "But close enough to sting." The warmth of the mug didn't reach her fingers. She set it down and crossed the hall to her study. A narrow room lined with file cabinets and photographs of a life lived in order. Vivian lingered in the doorway, arms folded. "You've got that look," she said. "The one you get when you're about to rearrange the chessboard." Nora didn't deny it. She opened the lowest drawer of the filing cabinet. Metal scraping metal. and pulled out a worn brown folder labeled Family Trust, Whitfield Estate. The sight of her late husband's signature across the cover, strong, looping, certain, brought a flicker of nostalgia, but not hesitation. Vivian watched her flip through the documents. That's the big one, isn't it? The fund that keeps your daughter in vacation rentals and designer handbags? Nora's reply was quiet. It was supposed to keep them secure, not spoiled. She laid the papers across her desk, the pages fanning out like a confession. Each one was a record of generosity disguised as obligation: tuition payments, down payment loans, interest-free gifts that had somehow turned into expectations. Vivian sipped her coffee, eyes narrowing. So, what now? You going to cut the cord? Nora traced her finger over the embossed letterhead of Woodland Trust Bank. No, she said. Not cut, redirect. The word landed between them, solid and final. Vivian tilted her head. That's going to leave a mark. I'm counting on it. The clock on the wall ticked once, loud in the stillness. Nora gathered the documents into a neat pile, securing them with a silver clip. Then she reached for a smaller envelope, the one she'd left on the restaurant table. Vivian nodded toward it. You think they'll open it tonight? No, Nora said. But they'll think about it. That's worse. She slid the trust folder into her briefcase, the latch snapping shut like a decision being sealed. Vivian smiled faintly. You're not just closing a door, Nora. You're rewriting the locks. Nora exhaled slowly. It's time. They stood there a moment, the two women framed in the lamplight, one calm, one quietly electric. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches against the windows, a soft percussion of change coming. Vivian reached for her coat. You're going to need me tomorrow, aren't you? I'll need a witness, Nora said. Vivian's eyes gleamed. Consider me armed, with coffee and curiosity. Nora nodded, then turned off the lamp. The room fell into half shadow, the documents gone but their weight still palpable. She paused at the window, watching the faint reflection of her own face in the glass. Steady, older, but sharper now. Let them whisper, she murmured. I've spoken in ink. Morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, scattering across Nora's kitchen table like quiet confetti. The clock read 8:27. She had been up since 5, her mind cataloging details while the coffee brewed. Signatures to obtain, clauses to review, one particular account to release from its long, reluctant service. Vivian arrived precisely on time, hair pinned up, a determined calm about her. You ready for this, General? She said, placing a travel mug beside Nora's untouched toast. Nora smiled faintly. Don't call me that until the battle's over. Please, Vivian said, waving a hand. You declared it the second you folded that napkin. By 9, they were pulling into Woodland Trust Bank. The building stood like a monument to discretion. Columns, polished stone, the faint echo of old money. Inside, the air smelled of paper and purpose. Henry Morris met them at the front desk, his manner steady as ever. 66 neatly pressed suit, a voice that always seemed to carry both respect and restraint. Nora, he said warmly, shaking her hand. You look resolute. I'm learning that's better than cheerful, she replied. He led them into his private office, mahogany, soft carpet, a large window overlooking the town square. Vivian took a seat beside Nora, eyes scanning the framed certificates like a curious hawk. Henry set a folder on the table. You mentioned last night that you wanted to discuss the Whitfield Family Fund. Nora nodded. It's time. He adjusted his glasses. That account's been running since Richard passed. It's structured to support educational expenses, housing assistance, emergency costs, mostly for Aaron's family. I know, Nora said. Every transaction tells the story. Henry hesitated. Forgive me, but you've been very generous. That fund's kept them stable. Are you sure you want to make changes? Nora met his gaze. I don't want to make changes, Henry. I want to close the valve. Vivian gave a small, approving hum beside her. Henry opened the ledger. We can dissolve it entirely, though that may have tax implications. No, Nora said, leaning forward. Not dissolve. Redirect. His brow furrowed. To whom? Nora tapped the folder in front of him. To people who treat gratitude like oxygen, not currency. Henry blinked, then smiled slowly, the kind of expression reserved for witnessing courage. You always did speak like a woman who knows where her receipts are. Vivian chuckled. That's her brand now. Henry flipped through several pages. All right. We'll need to outline new beneficiaries and create a charitable subtrust. Do you have organizations in mind? Nora unfolded a handwritten list from her purse, the ink still fresh from that morning. 3. She slid it across the desk. Henry adjusted his glasses and read aloud. Lancaster Elder Care Cooperative, HopeWorks, Housing for Single Mothers, Keystone Scholars Initiative. He looked up. All local. Nora nodded. All underfunded? For a long moment no one spoke. Even Vivian's usual commentary fell away, replaced by quiet admiration. Henry finally said, You understand, this changes everything about the estate's structure. Erin and her family won't be entitled, Nora finished for him. That's the point. Vivian leaned in, voice low but amused. You're not cutting them off, darling. You're teaching them what air feels like when someone stops spoon-feeding it. Henry smiled faintly at that. We'll prepare the redirection documents. You'll need to re-sign as controlling trustee. Nora glanced at the framed photo on his desk. Henry with his late wife at a charity gala, both mid-laugh. Henry, how long have you been doing this? 42 years, he said. And how many women have you seen take back their own legacy? He paused, considering. Not nearly enough. Nora reached for the pen he offered her. Her signature moved across the page with quiet precision, each stroke an unspoken amendment to the years she'd spent being the silent benefactor. When she set the pen down, Henry said, You've just rewritten the future, Nora. Good, she replied softly. It needed an editor. Vivian grinned. What's next? Paperwork, Nora said, gathering her bag. And peace? Henry rose as they stood. I'll file this today. Expect confirmation by morning. As they stepped back into the sunlight, Vivian nudged her shoulder. You realize your daughter's going to call you a tyrant. She already calls me worse in private, Nora said, opening her car door. Vivian laughed. And what are you going to call yourself? Nora paused, the wind tugging at her hair. Liberated. By noon, the confirmation email from Henry arrived. Fund redirection, executed and active. 2 minutes later, Nora's phone buzzed again. Erin. Mom. What did you do? Henry says he can't disclose details. You're making a scene over money again, aren't you? Nora stared at the screen for a long moment, then pressed the side button. The text went dark. Her coffee had gone cold, untouched beside a stack of revised statements. She picked up the phone once more, not to reply, but to take a screenshot. Then, with a small sigh, she dropped it into a new folder she'd created the night before. Closure. Vivian's voice called from the doorway. I brought scones and gossip. Which do you want first? Neither, Nora said, though a faint smile tugged at her mouth. Vivian set down a bakery box and slid into the chair opposite her. So, has the royal court responded? Nora tilted the phone toward her. A preview of their sermon. Vivian scanned the text, eyebrows arching. Oh, that's rich. Making a scene over money. coming from the woman whose husband once tried to expense their anniversary dinner as a business meeting. Nora chuckled softly. Embarrassment only stings when it's earned. Vivian raised her coffee in salute. Then may they itch for years. Nora's smile faded as she turned to her notebook. The lined pages were half filled with quotes and unfinished paragraphs, thoughts she'd been jotting down since the dinner. She tapped the pen against the margin, the rhythm steadying her pulse. "What are you writing?" Vivian asked. "A confession," Nora said. Vivian leaned back. "Lord, you're not starting a memoir, are you?" "Not quite. An essay." She paused, letting the words form in her mind before speaking them aloud. "When silence says too much?" Vivian's grin softened into something proud. "Sounds like you're ready to make noise." For the next few days, Nora wrote like she was breathing for the first time in months, measured, deliberate, unflinching. She wrote about being reduced to gratitude for her own generosity, about the way dismissal wears the same mask as civility. She wrote about the invisible taxes of motherhood: patience, pride, the constant inflation of forgiveness. When she was done, 6 pages sat neatly typed beside her coffee mug, her name printed at the bottom like a quiet signature of defiance. That afternoon, she mailed a copy to the Elm Room, where she'd once helped host women's civic events and charity luncheons. The new director, a younger woman named Meredith Cole, replied within hours. "Would you consider reading it at our next Women's Legacy Circle?" Nora hesitated. For 71 years, she had been the kind of woman people toasted but rarely listened to. Reading aloud meant removing her armor. But something inside her, something that had been quietly hardening since that dinner, said, "It's time." When the evening came, the Elm Room was softly lit, its windows glowing against the November dusk. The smell of polished wood and lavender candles filled the hall. About 30 women sat in curved rows, notebooks open, expectant but kind. Vivian, seated in the front, winked as Nora approached the podium. "Don't burn them too badly," she whispered. Nora adjusted the microphone. Her hands were steady. She began reading, her voice low but sure, each sentence measured like a verdict delivered without malice. When she spoke of the restaurant, that moment of being silenced, the whisper she wasn't meant to hear, the room shifted. No one looked away. No one smiled politely. They simply listened, as if every word hid a bruise they'd all been hiding. When she reached the last line, "I've learned that silence can be both armor and prison, and I've decided I'm tired of being protected by walls I didn't build." She folded the pages, closed them, and stepped back. The applause was soft at first, more reverent than enthusiastic, but it filled the space completely. A few women stood. A few dabbed their eyes. Vivian rose, clapping slowly, her grin shimmering through the dim light. As the sound faded, a woman in the back, a stranger with silver-streaked hair and tired eyes, stood. "You said everything I've lived," she said, voice trembling but clear. Nora met her gaze. "Then maybe we've both been too quiet for too long." Afterward, as people gathered their coats and whispered thank yous, Meredith pressed a card into Nora's hand. "Would you let us publish this in the Legacy Journal? It deserves to live beyond tonight." Nora nodded, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. "It already does." She turned toward Vivian, who was waiting by the door, coat in hand and a look that mixed pride with mischief. "Well?" Vivian asked. "Did it feel like revenge?" Nora smiled. "No. It felt like release." The call came just as Nora was watering the hydrangeas, their heavy blooms bending like gossip. Her phone buzzed against the porch rail, vibrating with the persistence of accusation. "Erin." 4 missed calls. She let it ring once more before answering. "Good morning, Erin." "Don't good morning me," Erin snapped. Her voice was brittle, the sound of composure cracking under heat. "You cut the kids off from their college funds?" Nora set down the watering can, watching the last drops fall like punctuation. "No," she said evenly. "I removed their parents from the equation." "What does that even mean?" "It means Callie and Drew will receive their stipends directly, from the Keystone Scholars Foundation, every semester. No detours through your household account." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Then, "You had no right. That money was for us to manage." "That's precisely the problem," Nora said. For a moment there was only the sound of breathing, Erin's uneven, Nora's steady. Then Greg's voice entered the background, louder, angrier. "Put her on speaker. Nora, this is unbelievable. You've undermined our authority as parents." Nora's eyes lifted toward the sky, where two birds fought over a branch. "You misused my silence," she said. Greg scoffed. "We didn't misuse anything. We handled things privately, as a family." "Privately," Nora repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, that's what you called it when I covered your property tax penalties, and Erin told people she handled the estate paperwork herself." "That was years ago," Erin cut in. "You're dredging up things that don't matter anymore." Nora's voice stayed calm. "They mattered every time you assumed the next rescue would come automatically." Greg muttered something about manipulation. Erin's voice trembled. Not from sorrow, but from loss of control. "So what? You just cut us out? You didn't even talk to us first? You didn't talk to me before deciding when I could speak at my own dinner." The line went silent. Even through the static, Nora could feel the weight of that reminder pressing down. When Erin spoke again, her tone was smaller. "You're punishing us." "No," Nora said. "I'm correcting the math." She ended the call before the echo of their protests could dilute the moment. The quiet that followed was rich, restorative. Inside, Vivian sat at the kitchen table surrounded by newspaper clippings. She glanced up as Nora entered. "You look like a woman who just finished a sermon." Nora poured herself coffee. "Close enough." Vivian leaned forward. "Let me guess. Erin's in full apocalypse mode?" "Complete meltdown," Nora said, stirring sugar into the cup. "Greg's using words like authority and disrespect. They've both mistaken dependency for partnership." Vivian chuckled. "Feels good to draw the line, doesn't it?" "It feels—" Nora paused, searching for precision. "Necessary." She sat down, sliding a notebook from under a stack of papers. On the first page, she wrote in crisp, deliberate script, "When love isn't loyalty, but leverage." Vivian peered over. "A sequel?" "A continuation," Nora corrected. "Different currency, same economy." As the hours passed, the house filled with the sound of keys clicking. Nora's words flowed with surgical clarity, about affection weaponized into guilt, about how love used as leverage ceases to be love at all. She wrote about the myth of the grateful daughter, the invisible labor of women who give until the act itself becomes expectation. Every paragraph was an incision, clean and necessary. When she was done, she printed the pages and placed them beside the first essay in her drawer. 2 chapters of reclamation, 2 receipts. Vivian closed her laptop and stretched. "You know, most people your age take up gardening or bridge." Nora smiled faintly. "This is bridge. I'm just building the one they'll have to cross to find me again." Outside, the mail truck rolled past, leaving a small envelope in her box. Nora walked out to retrieve it, the paper still warm from the sun. The sender, Wharton and Ellis Legal Group. Her late husband's lawyers. She tore it open carefully. Inside was a single note, handwritten by Claire Ellis, the estate partner she'd met once years ago. "Nora, I reviewed the changes Henry submitted. You're in complete control of the trust now. Congratulations. Few people ever reclaim what's rightfully theirs." Nora folded the letter with care, slipping it into her notebook. Rowan Bistro's dining room had always been curated silence, warm wood, low jazz, the faint hum of wealth trying to appear effortless. But now, something new hung beside table 7. It was a small brass plaque, just 6 inches across, polished to a glow. Beneath the restaurant's signature cursive logo, an inscription read, "This was the last one." In quiet appreciation, N. Whitfield, the manager, a mild man named Peter Lane, had decided to frame Nora's receipt after she'd left it behind that night, paid in full, a mystery wrapped in composure. Over time, the story had trickled out through staff gossip and regulars' curiosity until it became local folklore. When new diners asked about the plaque, Peter would simply smile. That table taught us more about gratitude than any wine pairing. It wasn't meant as spectacle. It was a quiet tribute, one that refused to fade. By spring, nearly everyone in Lancaster had heard some version of the tale. A birthday dinner gone wrong, a matriarch's poised revenge, a single act of civility that outlasted every slight. And of course, Erin heard it too. It happened one Saturday afternoon, when a colleague from her marketing firm sent her a link. "Isn't this about your mom?" The article, published in the Lancaster Ledger, featured a photo of the plaque and a short write-up. In a town known for polite dinners and quiet feuds, one woman left a message no one could ignore. The manager of Rowan Bistro calls it a master class in composure. Erin stormed into the restaurant that evening, her heels striking the tile like accusations. "I need to speak with the owner," she told the hostess, voice clipped and cold. When Peter appeared, Erin thrust her phone toward him, the article still glowing on the screen. "Take it down." He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The plaque. The inscription. It's humiliating. My family has a reputation in this town." Peter folded his hands politely. "With respect, ma'am, your mother left something that meant a great deal to this staff. We've had guests request that table specifically just to see it." "That's absurd," Erin snapped. "It's private family business. She's exploiting us." Peter's smile was patient, almost kind. "No, Mrs. Grant. She just paid her bill." Erin's face flushed crimson. She turned sharply, muttering something under her breath, and left without another word. That night, Peter added a tiny frame beneath the plaque with a new line of text. Just a quiet addition, one no one could claim ownership over. In gratitude for the lesson. Word of the confrontation spread, but not as gossip, more like admiration. People began quoting Nora's essays in book clubs, forwarding her Elm Room reading on community newsletters. The whispers of disapproval that Erin tried to seed online only amplified Nora's quiet legend. By the time spring turned to summer, Nora's circle had expanded far beyond her neighborhood. Women she'd never met wrote her letters, thank you notes wrapped in confessions. Widows, single mothers, retired teachers, all of them recognizing themselves in her restraint. One envelope came from the Elm Room itself. Meredith Cole's note was brief but bright. "Nora, your voice has become its own currency. We'd be honored if you'd lead our upcoming Women in Money series. Topic of your choice." Nora read the letter twice before folding it neatly. Vivian was already in the living room, arranging flowers with her usual flair. "Well," she said, "they've finally realized you're more than their legend?" Nora smiled. "They realized I own the copyright." Vivian laughed. "So what'll you talk about? Receipts? Redemption?" Nora sipped her tea. "Investment." Vivian cocked her head. "In what?" "In myself." When the night of the event arrived, the Elm Room glowed like a jewel box. The audience was larger this time. Professionals, retirees, daughters, and mothers, sitting shoulder to shoulder. Nora took the stage, her notes tucked inside a leather folder. The microphone felt lighter this time. "They taught me I was just a wallet," she began, so I responded like an investor. A murmur rippled through the crowd, part laughter, part recognition. She went on to talk about equity, not in numbers but in respect. About value, not in dollars but in dignity. She spoke of how women are taught to fund everyone else's comfort and call it love. When she finished, the applause rose like a tide, steady, sincere, filling the room until Nora felt it in her bones. Vivian joined her on stage, whispering, "You realize they'll never stop talking about you now." Nora looked out at the faces in the audience, some smiling, some weeping, all listening. "Good," she said softly. "They've mistaken my silence for permission long enough." The ink was still drying on Nora's Elm Room speech when the idea fully settled, not as impulse, but inevitability. The applause had faded. The flowers had wilted on her kitchen counter. Yet the line she'd spoken, "They taught me I was just a wallet, so I responded like an investor," kept echoing in her mind, refusing to be metaphor. It was time to prove it. By late morning, she sat in her study, the blinds half drawn against a June sun that painted slow-moving stripes across her desk. A stack of folders sat neatly beside a black fountain pen, the same one her husband had used when signing the original will 2 decades earlier. Vivian arrived carrying her usual mix of caffeine and commentary. "Every time I come over now there's paperwork. I miss when our crimes were culinary." Nora smiled faintly. "This one's more permanent than cheesecake." Vivian set down the coffee and glanced at the open document on the desk. "Wharton and Ellis. That's not a light name to see on a Saturday morning." "It's not light work," Nora said. She adjusted her reading glasses and uncapped the pen. "I'm rewriting the terms of everything that bears my name." Vivian's brows rose. "Oh. I love when you talk revolution." The phone on Nora's desk buzzed. An incoming call from Claire Ellis, the estate lawyer who had once handled Richard Whitfield's affairs with cool precision. Nora put it on speaker. "Mrs. Whitfield," Claire's voice came, smooth as glass. "I have the drafts ready for your review. This will finalize the executor removal and beneficiary redirection." "Thank you, Claire," Nora said. "Send the courier." Within the hour, a man in a dark suit arrived with a sealed envelope. He left it without conversation. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its size, less than a pound of paper, yet heavy with history. Nora opened it slowly. The language was clinical, but the meaning was liberation. Effective immediately. Aaron Grant and Gregory Grant are hereby removed as executors and residual heirs of the Whitfield estate. Her signature would make it law. Vivian whistled softly as she scanned the page. "You're cutting the cord, all right? That's not pruning. That's replanting." Nora didn't flinch. It was overdue. The new beneficiaries were listed in neat order. Lancaster Community Music School, for scholarships and instruments. Hearth House Women's Shelter, to fund emergency lodging and counseling. HopeWorks Foundation, to support single parents returning to college. Each name carried purpose. Each name replaced entitlement with gratitude. "And the grandkids?" Vivian asked gently. Nora flipped to the final clause. "Protected. Their college stipends will continue, locked in with a third-party trustee. Aaron and Greg can't touch a cent." Vivian grinned, her tone half pride, half awe. "You just rewrote your legacy, and theirs." Nora signed the first page, then the next. Each stroke of the pen felt lighter, cleaner. Years of compromise turned to clarity, one letter at a time. When she was done, she gathered the signed pages, stacked them with perfect symmetry, and slid them into a leather folio embossed with her initials. Vivian sipped her coffee. "You know, most people your age think about what they'll leave behind. You're over here curating who deserves to touch it." Nora smiled faintly. "It's not about who gets it. It's about who'll use it well." She stood, crossing to the old oak cabinet in the corner, a relic her husband had once used to store golf trophies. Inside, neatly organized, sat her lockbox. She opened it, removed a blank brass plate, and with a steady hand wrote on it in black marker, "For the ones who earned it." She affixed the plate to the inside lid before placing the signed documents within. The click of the latch echoed like punctuation. For a long moment she simply stood there, breathing in the quiet that followed, the strange, satisfying calm of reclaiming her narrative. Vivian broke the silence. "Do you ever think they'll understand? Aaron and Greg, I mean." Nora looked toward the window, where a bird was building its nest beneath the eave. "Maybe someday," she said. "But by then, it won't matter. The lesson won't need my voice. It'll have my signature." Vivian smiled. "You always did prefer ink to apology." "Apologies fade," Nora said. "Signatures last." They shared a look, one of friendship, defiance, and something like peace. The knock came just as the cinnamon bread finished baking. It wasn't sharp or hurried. 3 soft taps, a pause, then one more. Nora glanced at the clock. Saturday, 10:42 a.m. Too early for the mail, too late for Vivian. When she opened the door, Callie stood on the porch, a half smile and a nervous grip on a canvas tote slung over her shoulder. "Hi, Grandma." Nora blinked, then smiled, genuine and small. "Well, that's a sight for sore hydrangeas." Callie laughed awkwardly. "Mom doesn't know I'm here." "Of course she doesn't," Nora said, stepping aside. "That's why I'm smiling." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and coffee and something warmer, peace. Callie looked around like she was seeing it for the first time. "It's quieter than I remember." "It's supposed to be," Nora said. "Sit. Cocoa or coffee?" "Cocoa?" Callie said quickly, dropping her bag by the couch. "It feels like that kind of day." They moved to the porch, mugs steaming between their hands. The morning light cut across the fields behind the house, turning the dew into 1,000 little mirrors. For a few minutes, they just sat. 2 women from different worlds, connected by something blood could never fully explain. Callie broke the silence first. "Mom's upset." "I imagine so," Nora said lightly. "She's had a lot of practice." "She said you're making things harder on everyone, that the money is finally being used for something real," Nora finished. "Your tuition's secure, Callie. Direct deposit every semester. No middlemen." Callie's shoulders dropped. "I figured that's what you did." Nora turned her head, surprised. "You did?" Callie nodded. "Mom was angry. But I saw the letter from the foundation. It said the scholarship was established in your name. Grandma, I don't think I ever knew how much you did for us." Nora took a slow sip of cocoa. "I didn't expect you to," she said quietly. "I just hoped you'd notice eventually." Callie looked down at her hands. "We never asked. We just took. I guess I thought that's what families do." Nora smiled softly. "It is. Until someone decides to change the definition." They sat for a while longer, letting the small talk stretch into something more honest. Callie told her about school, about a poetry class she'd joined, about a boy who liked her writing but not her independence. "You should keep both," Nora said. "I plan to," Callie replied. Then, after a moment, "Can I ask something kind of weird?" "Always." "Why'd you do it? The essays, the foundation, all of it?" Nora thought for a moment, watching the wind ripple the leaves along the porch rail. "Because silence can keep the peace, or it can keep the problem. I chose the louder kind of peace." Callie nodded slowly, her eyes bright. After a while, Nora stood. "Come on, we can't talk this much about change and not bake something." In the kitchen, flour dusted the air like snowfall. Callie rolled the dough clumsily, laughing when it stuck to the counter. "You make this look easy." "I've had a lot of practice letting things rise," Nora said. They baked cinnamon twists and took a photo when they came out of the oven, Callie grinning, Nora holding the tray like a trophy. Nora printed it on her old wireless printer, slid it into a small frame, and handed it to her granddaughter. "For your dorm," she said. "Proof that you can make something from scratch and not burn it, or hold a grudge." Callie laughed, hugging her tight. It was the kind of hug that didn't need apology, the kind that felt like inheritance of a different sort. Before leaving, Callie lingered by the doorway. "Can I borrow one of your essays? The first one. The one about silence." Nora walked to her desk, opened the drawer marked closure, and pulled out a printed copy of When Silence Says Too Much. She slid it into an envelope, adding a small sticky note on top. "For when you need to remember that stillness isn't weakness." Callie tucked it into her bag. "I'll bring it back." "I hope not," Nora said. "I wrote it to be kept." They exchanged a look. One of recognition, not reconciliation. After Callie left, the house felt quiet again, but not empty. Vivian appeared at the back door a few hours later, sunglasses perched on her head. "Well?" she asked, holding up a paper bag. "I brought lunch and curiosity." Nora poured her friend a glass of iced tea. She came. No drama, no demands. Vivian smiled. So it happened. The reckoning. Nora shook her head. "No. The understanding." Vivian raised her glass. "To endings?" Nora clinked hers softly. "To cycles that finally stopped spinning." They sat on the porch as the afternoon light shifted into gold, silence stretching between them. Not empty now, but earned. The phone stopped ringing just after sunset. 3 calls, then silence. An ending that arrived without announcement. Nora stood at the kitchen window, watching the last of the light disappear across the field. The air outside was still. Even the crickets seemed hesitant to begin. Inside, the answering machine blinked, its small red light pulsing like a heartbeat. She didn't press play. She didn't need to. Erin's voice had already played in her mind enough times for one lifetime, pleading, defensive, always reaching for control disguised as concern. Instead, she sat at her desk, switched on the lamp, and pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer. Her fountain pen hovered for a moment before it touched the page. "Erin, you taught me how I was seen." I responded accordingly. The line came out too easily, like something that had been waiting at the tip of her tongue for years. She paused, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint echo of wind through the gutter. Then she continued. "You thought love meant access. You mistook silence for approval. I mistook endurance for grace. We were both wrong." Her handwriting was slow, deliberate, the kind that left small indents on the paper beneath. Each sentence felt less like accusation and more like autopsy, naming what had died between them without trying to resurrect it. "I wish you well, not comfort. I wish you peace, not permission." She set the pen down and read the page twice. It wasn't bitter, it was balanced. A perfect blend of truth and restraint. The cruelty wasn't in what it said, but in the fact that it would never be sent. Nora folded the paper neatly, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it shut. On the front she wrote nothing. Not a name, not an address. Just the finality of blank space. She placed it inside the top drawer of her desk and closed it softly. Vivian arrived 20 minutes later, breezing in with her usual mix of perfume and observation. "I brought pie. It felt like a pie kind of evening." "Cherry or apple?" Nora asked without looking up. "Cherry. The color of forgiveness." Or so the bakery sign claimed. Vivian stopped when she saw the sealed envelope on the desk. "Well, that looks ominous." Nora smiled faintly. "It's not. It's unfinished business that decided to stay unfinished." Vivian pulled up a chair, curiosity glinting. "You wrote her?" "I did." "And you're not sending it?" "No." Vivian nodded approvingly. Sometimes peace is choosing not to mail the truth. That's exactly it, Nora said. Sending it would be correction. Keeping it is clarity. Vivian smiled, sliding the pie box toward her. You're getting good at the gentle forms of revenge. This isn't revenge, Nora said softly. It's relief. They ate in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't demand explanation. Later, when Vivian left, Nora walked back to her desk and opened another folder. Family accounts, discretionary funds. There, listed between insurance payouts and travel reimbursements, sat one untouched account, Whitfield Family Travel Fund, $48,000. She had once imagined using it for a family trip. Her, Erin, the grandkids, maybe even Greg if he behaved. That was before she realized shared vacations didn't fix fractured values. By morning, the fund had a new destination. At Woodland Trust Bank, Henry looked over the transfer paperwork, glasses sliding down his nose. The Grandmother Writer's Grant? He read aloud. Nora nodded. A small stipend for women over 60 who want to publish their first essay. Too many stories die before they're told. Henry smiled. You're building a legacy that doesn't need heirs. I'm giving one to the right people, she said. He adjusted the file. Your legacy just shifted into motion, Nora. It was never meant to stay still. Henry leaned back in his chair, studying her. You know, I've managed trusts for 40 years, and I've never seen someone turn closure into currency. Nora chuckled. That's because most people think closure means ending something. I'm just beginning. When she got home that afternoon, she placed a copy of the grant paperwork in her safe, tucked beside the brass plate that read, "For the ones who earned it." Then she poured herself tea and opened the curtains. Outside, the garden shimmered with late summer gold, and for the first time in months, she felt no impulse to respond to anything. The phone stayed silent all evening. The email arrived just after dawn, its subject line a thinly veiled snarl. Subject: You've gone too far, Mother. Nora read it once through, her tea cooling beside her. The tone was familiar. Furious, self-pitying, rehearsed. Erin had copied Greg, of course, and laced the message with threats disguised as family concern. We'll contest this. We'll talk to the lawyers. You're being manipulated. Think of your grandchildren. Nora closed the laptop. The only thing she did after that was forward the message to Henry with a 2-word note. For record keeping. She didn't reply to Erin, not even a line. Silence, once used against her, had become her language of authority. By mid-morning, she was sitting in her lawyer's office. The air smelled faintly of oak polish and coffee. Expensive, efficient, impersonal. Claire Ellis, sharp in a navy blazer and pearl earrings, looked up from her computer. I received Henry's forward, she said. Do you want to proceed with the directive updates? Yes, Nora replied. Everything we discussed. Claire nodded. No contact authorization? Correct. Effective immediately. No next of kin access to my records. No medical decisions. No financial overrides. If something happens to me, Vivian has power of attorney for both health and estate. Claire paused, her tone softening. That's a strong boundary to draw. It's not a boundary, Nora said, eyes steady. It's a perimeter. She signed the papers with the same calm she'd once used to write checks for her daughter's ambitions. Stroke by stroke, she built her fortress in ink. When the last page was done, Claire leaned back and exhaled. You're protected, and frankly, untouchable. Nora smiled faintly. It's amazing how safety looks a lot like solitude. Claire slid the folder across the desk. Or independence, depending on who's looking. Nora left the office into the cool late summer air. The sky was an unapologetic blue, too bright for regret. At home, Vivian was waiting on the porch with her usual thermos and mischief. You look like someone who just fired her entire bloodline. Just their access, Nora said, settling beside her. They'll have to earn everything else from the outside. Vivian whistled. It took you 71 years to become bulletproof. Not bad timing. Nora smiled, glancing at the horizon. I don't need armor, just clarity. The afternoon passed quietly. Nora sorted through her journals, old ones filled with her late husband's neat penmanship, newer ones in her own slanted script. She opened a fresh page and wrote slowly, deliberately, the way one chisels something meant to last. Grief taught me to be silent. Disrespect taught me to speak. And now, peace is teaching me to listen to the quiet without mistaking it for loss. The words steadied her. She closed the book and looked out at the garden. The wind was lifting the last of the summer blooms, scattering petals across the grass like small departures. A soft knock came at the door a little later. Vivian, again, holding the mail. You got something from Callie, she said, waving a postcard. Mailed from campus. Nora took it, smiling before she even turned it over. The picture showed a brick courtyard and a line of maple trees just starting to blush red. On the back, in neat handwriting, Grandma, you're my favorite story. Love, Callie. Nora traced the words with her thumb, her eyes soft but unclouded. She's going to be fine, she murmured. Vivian grinned. She's going to be dangerous, in the best way. They sat together as the evening came in, the porch light flickering on. Vivian sipped her tea. You know, Nora, you might be the only woman I know who managed to turn being ignored into a legacy. Nora chuckled. It was overdue. I just stopped asking for attention and started earning history. The two women fell into a companionable quiet, the kind that held both laughter and absence without tension. Then, from inside the house, Nora's phone chimed. A new message alert. Not Aaron this time. The preview line glowed faintly in the dusk. From Editor Paw Writers, journal.org, subject, Legacy Feature Draft Approval, plus a national submission offer. Vivian glanced at her. Is that what I think it is? Nora's smile deepened, serene but sharp. It's what comes next. She rose, leaving the postcard on the porch table, the word story catching the lamplight. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier, printed on thick cream cardstock that smelled faintly of ink and formality. The Pennsylvania Writers' Journal presents Legacy Voices, stories that redefined the narrative underneath, in modest serif font, featuring Nora Whitfield, The Cost of Silence. Now, as Nora stood before her bedroom mirror, she adjusted the lapel of her slate blue blazer. It was neither flashy nor forgettable, exactly how she preferred her presence to feel these days. Her hair, silver and soft, framed her face like parentheses around a lifetime of unspoken sentences, finally finding punctuation. Vivian appeared in the doorway, wearing a black silk scarf and her usual smirk. You clean up like a verdict, she said. Nora smiled. Let's hope they find me not guilty of sentimentality. The event was held at the Lancaster Public Auditorium, a converted courthouse now lined with portraits of local writers, community activists, and the occasional forgotten visionary. The irony wasn't lost on her. Inside, the hall buzzed with polite excitement. Dozens of chairs formed half-moons around a small stage where a lectern stood beneath warm amber lights. At its base, Nora noticed something familiar. A small framed note leaning against the podium glass. The laminated receipt from Rowan Bistro. This was the last one. She felt a soft laugh catch in her chest. Someone, likely Meredith from the Elm Room, had placed it there, a private nod to where the story truly began. Vivian, spotting it too, leaned over. You're officially a folktale. Not bad for a woman who used to get shushed at dinner, Nora whispered. Their table sat near the front, surrounded by what Nora now called her chosen ones, Vivian, Henry, Meredith, Claire, and a handful of women from the Elm Room Legacy Circle. No family name cards, no last-minute apologies, just people who had listened when she finally started speaking. As the event began, the host stepped forward. Tonight, we honor voices that refuse to stay quiet. Each story here tonight isn't just writing, it's reclamation. When they reached Nora's segment, the lights softened to a calm glow. Meredith took the podium first, her voice steady as she began reading from Nora's essay. I used to believe silence was noble, that it protected dignity, that it kept peace. But silence, I learned, is the most polite form of erasure. So I started over, with words. The audience leaned in, the room stilling into reverent quiet. As Meredith read passages from both When Silence Says Too Much and When Love Isn't Loyalty, but Leverage, Nora's throat tightened. Not with grief, but with awe. The words sounded different out loud, as if they'd grown muscle since leaving the page. When the reading ended, the applause rose like a slow tide, not thunderous, not dramatic, just long enough to mean something. Nora stood, not to speak, but to nod, a small acknowledgement that this moment wasn't performance, it was proof. Afterward, champagne glasses clinked around her table. Vivian raised hers first, her smile sharp and fond. To the woman who showed us how silence ends, with ink and grace. The table murmured approval. Nora lifted her glass, matching Vivian's gaze. And receipts? She said. Laughter rippled through the group, light but meaningful. Henry leaned over. You know, that plaque at Rowan's? They've had to polish it twice this year. Apparently, people keep touching it for luck. Luck? Nora asked. Or courage, he replied. Nora smiled, setting her glass down. Either will do. Across the room, Meredith caught her eye and motioned toward the podium. You're welcome to say something, if you'd like. Nora shook her head gently. I already did. Years ago. They're just hearing it now. The night wound down with quiet laughter and the clatter of dessert plates. As the lights dimmed, she glanced once more at the framed receipt by the podium, its edges glinting softly under the amber light, like a relic of some private religion. Vivian placed a hand on her shoulder. You realize you've become the ghost they quote when they're brave enough to leave a room they don't belong in. Nora's eyes lingered on the stage. Good. Maybe they'll start haunting the right places. The morning after the tribute, the sky was a soft, forgiving gray, the kind that blurred edges instead of sharpening them. Nora sat at her kitchen table, the event program folded neatly beside her coffee cup. Vivian sat across from her, hair tied back, eyes sharp as ever. Well, Vivian said, stirring her tea. I've heard 3 different people call you an icon this morning. You're officially the patron saint of boundaries. Nora smiled faintly. Strange sainthood. No miracles. Just paperwork. Vivian tilted her head. You never did answer my question last night. Nora looked up. Which one? If you could go back to that birthday dinner, to that moment, would you have said something? Out loud. To them. Nora took a slow breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. No, she said finally, because if I had spoken that night, they wouldn't have heard it. Vivian studied her. You really believe that? I know it, Nora replied. They were listening for confirmation, not truth. Some people can't hear you until the silence gets expensive. Vivian grinned softly. You're still dangerous when you're poetic. Old habits, Nora said. She rose, gathering her bag and keys. Walk with me? They left the house and made their way through downtown Lancaster, the streets humming with Saturday ease. Farmers' market stalls, coffee cups in hand, couples moving in soft conversation. For years, Nora had walked these same streets invisible, her kindness taken as camouflage, but now The glances that met her carried something new, recognition, even respect. A woman at a flower stand smiled as they passed. "Mrs. Whitfield?" Nora paused. "Yes?" The woman looked nervous, younger, mid-30s maybe. "I read your essays, especially the one about silence. You made it okay to walk away from disrespect." Nora blinked, surprised. "That wasn't my intention." "Then it was a good accident," the woman said, holding out a single daisy. "For you. On the house." Nora accepted it, touched more deeply than she wanted to show. "Thank you." As they continued walking, Vivian murmured, "See? Patron saint. Told you." "Careful," Nora said. "I'll start charging for blessings." They laughed, the sound cutting through the morning air like soft rebellion. By afternoon, the sky had cleared. Vivian went home, promising to call before dinner. Nora drove alone to St. Luke's Cemetery, the same place she hadn't visited in nearly a year. Her husband's headstone sat beneath a maple tree, its base lined with fallen leaves. She brushed them aside and laid the daisy down. "Hello, Richard," she said quietly. "It's been a while." The words came slowly, as if crossing a bridge she'd built plank by plank. "You'd be proud," she said. "Or terrified. Maybe both." She smiled faintly. "I finally stopped keeping the peace. Turns out it doesn't need me to survive." For a long moment she just stood there, the wind lifting her hair like a gesture of approval. Then she pulled a folded sheet of paper from her coat pocket, her newest habit, and placed it in the small metal box beside the headstone where she kept their shared notes. "You always told me strength was quiet. I finally learned it's also contagious." She closed the box gently, then turned toward the car. Back home, the late afternoon light slanted through the kitchen windows, touching everything with a soft, almost cinematic warmth. Nora went straight to her study, opened her safe, and pulled out the leather-bound folder labeled Legacy. Inside, among the essays, deeds, and trust documents, she added a single envelope. On the front she wrote in clean, deliberate letters, "For Callie. When it's her turn to be ignored." She placed it inside, her hand lingering for a moment. "Not yet," she murmured, "but someday." As she closed the safe, Vivian appeared in the doorway, unannounced as always, holding 2 glasses of wine. "You always manage to look like you're ending a chapter," she said. "Maybe I am." Vivian handed her a glass. "You know, you didn't get revenge." Nora raised an eyebrow. "Didn't I?" "No," Vivian said, settling into the armchair. "You got release. It's quieter, but it echoes longer." Nora clinked her glass against Vivian's. "Then I'll drink to echoes." They sat together in the golden hush of early evening, the air filled with the faint hum of crickets returning. Outside, the last light pooled across the garden, spilling through the window and across the brass plate in Nora's safe, its inscription glinting like a promise, for the ones who earned it. The envelope from the Pennsylvania State Library arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked neatly among bills and catalogs. Nora didn't recognize the return address at first, but when she saw the embossed seal, a quill and keystone intertwined, she smiled. Inside was a single page of heavy parchment, official notice of inclusion. The Commonwealth Legacy Archive formally welcomes the cost of silence and, when love isn't loyalty, but leverage, into its permanent literary collection. At the bottom, a handwritten note from the archive director read, "You gave us a map, with receipts." Nora laughed aloud, the kind of laugh that comes from recognition rather than surprise. She held the letter against her chest for a moment before pinning it to her corkboard, right between Callie's postcard and a photo from the Elm Room event. That night, over tea and lemon cookies, she told Vivian. "They're archiving my essays," Nora said, voice calm but eyes shining. Vivian blinked, then broke into a grin. "You're official now. The state of Pennsylvania acknowledges your wrath as literature. Nora chuckled. Wrath ages well in print. Vivian lifted her cup. To being footnoted in history, without needing an apology first. Nora clinked her cup lightly. To quiet revolutions. By autumn, Nora began the slow process of downsizing. Not out of necessity, but intention. Her house had grown too large for her new kind of living. Too many rooms filled with echoes that no longer required her presence. The cottage she chose sat near a lake just outside of town, the kind of place where the air smelled like pine and the nights hummed with cicadas. When she moved in, she brought only what mattered. One sturdy box marked legacy. Inside were her journals, essays, the trust papers, and, carefully laminated, the original receipt from Rowan Bistro. It felt less like nostalgia and more like inventory. Vivian helped with the move, naturally, though she complained every step of the way. You're too organized, she muttered, lifting a small box labeled kitchen. Essentials? If I ever move, I'm just setting my old house on fire. That's one solution, Nora said dryly. Please, Vivian smirked. You'd alphabetize your flames. They laughed until they had to stop to catch their breath, both leaning on the kitchen counter like teenagers who'd gotten away with something. When everything was settled, they stood outside, watching the sun lower itself gently over the lake. The water shimmered like a sheet of melted brass. Vivian broke the silence first. You really did it. You walked away from noise and ended up somewhere that actually sounds like you? Nora smiled, adjusting her shawl against the breeze. I'm finally living at a table that fits me. Vivian nodded approvingly. You built it from your own silence. Not bad for a woman who used to apologize for speaking too long. Turns out, Nora said, silence is only golden when you own it. Every Thursday, without fail, Vivian drove out with a lemon cake from their favorite bakery. They'd sit on the screened porch overlooking the lake, gossiping about town politics, essays gone viral, and which male author had most recently misunderstood feminism on public radio. Sometimes they talked about Callie, now interning for the Elm Room Journal and sending postcards with short poems scrawled in the margins. Inheritance without permission, Vivian read aloud one afternoon, quoting Callie's upcoming lecture title. I like that she stole your fire. She didn't steal it, Nora said, smiling. I left it where she could find it. Vivian cut another slice of cake, shaking her head. You really have become the ghost of Lancaster. Every woman over 50 quotes you at brunch. Good, Nora said. May they all stop asking for validation before they order dessert. Vivian laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. As twilight spread across the lake, the two women sat quietly, the air filled with the soft chorus of crickets and rippling water. The framed plaque from Rowan Bistro hung inside the cottage's small study, its reflection catching in the glass door each evening. This was the last one. Nora liked that the words followed her everywhere she sat, like punctuation that had finally found its sentence. The morning of Nora Whitfield's 72nd birthday began the way she liked all mornings to begin now, with light instead of noise. The lake outside her cottage was still, catching the sunrise in fragments, like a mirror that had learned to forgive its own cracks. The air smelled of rain-soaked pine and lemon cake from yesterday's visit. She brewed her coffee, steady and unhurried, and opened the window just enough to let in the chorus of waking birds. No phone alerts, no forced celebrations, no table full of whispered edits to her existence. The quiet wasn't empty. It was earned. By mid-morning, the mail arrived. A small bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, asters, and one defiant marigold, sat in a glass jar on her porch, tied with a twine ribbon. The card was handwritten, the pen strokes looping and sure. Happy birthday, Grandma. You spoke without saying a word. I heard everything. Love, Callie. Nora smiled and placed the note on the mantel beside the brass plate from her safe. "She's going to be unstoppable," she murmured. At noon, Vivian appeared in her usual entrance. No knock, no warning, holding a pie tin and grinning like she owned the afternoon. "Birthday pie delivery," she announced. "Blueberry this time. I figured you'd had enough citrus philosophy to last the decade." "You bring pie like it's contraband," Nora teased, taking the tin and setting it on the counter. "It is contraband," Vivian said. "Joy this good should be regulated." They laughed, and for a moment the years between them disappeared into the hum of the radio and the smell of fresh pastry. Henry arrived later carrying a bottle of wine and a wrapped box. "I was told there would be pie," he said, handing her the gift. Nora raised an eyebrow. "And what if there isn't? Then I'll have to bill you for emotional distress." Vivian swatted his arm. "Sit down before she rewrites your will again." They ate dinner at the small round table by the window. Roast chicken, warm bread, and laughter that came easily. The kind of meal that didn't need to prove its significance. There were no toasts, no cameras, just friends who had seen her become the person she was always meant to be when no one else was watching. After dessert, Henry poured the last of the wine and said, "So, Nora, how does it feel to live without an audience?" Nora smiled, "Like finally exhaling after a lifetime of holding my breath." Vivian lifted her glass. "To peace that doesn't need applause." They clinked glasses gently, the sound small but certain, like punctuation marking the end of a story told well. When her friends left that evening, Nora walked them to the porch. The air was cool and sweet with lake mist. As their taillights disappeared down the road, she turned back to her quiet cottage. On the kitchen counter sat one last envelope she hadn't noticed before. Cream-colored, no return address, sealed with simple gold foil. She opened it carefully. Inside was a birthday card, handwritten in elegant script. "Dear Mrs. Whitfield, from all of us at Rowan Bistro, thank you for reminding this town that some dinners change more than a menu. Table 7 is always yours." Nora stared at the words for a long moment, then let out a soft laugh, the kind that carried both irony and gratitude. She placed the card beside the framed receipt on her bookshelf, the two now bookending an entire era of her life. She brewed one last cup of tea and sat by the window as the night deepened.